Hello people! Do you want a book review? You want a book review. It's been a while since we've had a book review. Let's do some bonding, you and I. Let's find something really atrocious and just thrash it. So this week I present to you the one book that somehow, for some unfathomable reason, managed to enchant the entire young adult community despite being the most infantile and asinine piece of garbage. I'm the missing N and this is Divergent. Plot summary. We live in the peaceful society of the future in which the population has voluntarily divided itself into 5 factions, each of which is based on a personality trait. They have really obscure names, so I'm going to use some terms that you might be more familiar with. Gryffindor, Hufflepuff, Slytherin, Ravenclaw, and the 5th one, because we're original. Our main character, Beatrice, has just moved from Hufflepuff to Gryffindor and is now trying to pass her initiation tests, which are basically a set of exams. Yep, that is the plot. Sure, there's some larger thing about some vague threat to society as a whole, but that only really kicks off about 6 chapters before the end. Imagine if the first Harry Potter book was about Goyle trying to pass his first year. That is basically what this is. I should point out the main character is special. She's something called Divergent, which basically means she has more than one personality trait. Oh my god. If for some reason, which I feel is never adequately explained, this is taboo and she must not tell anyone. And so it's meant to drive the plot a little bit, but it never really shows, and the main character just goes out of her way to hide this fact. In case this hasn't become clear yet, I did not like this book, but I know a lot of people did. So let me try and strengthen my case by listing all the reasons Divergent is so bad. 1. The entire premise is incredibly flimsy. Supposedly the 5 factions were set up in some attempt to not have another great war happen. Who in their right mind segregates a society in the hopes of bringing peace? Anyone with more than 3 functioning brain cells would know that this just screams of an upcoming civil war. 2. The book has so many plot holes you could practically use it as a cheese grater. Why has the main character moved to Gryffindor? Why aren't more people divergent? Why aren't more people factionless? Why aren't the people who are born into a faction more likely of passing their exams? And why is it so hush-hush to talk about people moving between factions when it seems to be such a common occurrence? And I counted some numbers here as well. How come there are so few people in a given year? Like, based on what this book is saying, the entire population of Chicago would have to be smaller than 10,000. It does not add up. 3. Our main character, in order to pass her exams, has to be on the top half of her class. Not only does this remove most of the tension from the book, but furthermore, the main character is just so insipid that I have no reason to care about her more than the other students. Why should I root for her? Veronica Roth, you've given me nothing. If this book hadn't been written in the first person, I wouldn't even have been able to tell whether I was supposed to like this whiny, snivelling cow. 4. When you're writing a book in which every person belongs to some faction that is based on a personality trait, there is a risk that you'll end up creating some pretty one-dimensional characters. To her credit, Veronica Roth splendidly avoids this by giving all the characters 0 personality. The result is just a mess of at least a dozen completely indistinguishable characters, which isn't helped by the fact that they're given such bland names as Drew, Edward and Will. I could go on about how the romance is so clumsy and awkward, and the rule of show don't tell has been beaten into non-existence. But for the sake of keeping this short, let me just address one final criticism. All of what I've just said could be forgiven if you consider this to be a children's book, aimed at, a younger audience who doesn't care so much about all the nitpicky details, but who just want to feel like they're the main character in their fantasy book. There's nothing wrong with that, and so in that sense, I guess you could almost compare it to something like Artemis Fowl, if you were feeling particularly generous and suffering from major brain damage. But that's why it's so jarring when all of a sudden the book tries to tackle big issues like sexual assault, child abuse and suicide. The tone is inconsistent. But even then, Divergent is clearly targeted towards a more mature audience, and so I am going to judge it by grown-up standards, and by those standards, it is appalling. It's a blatant attempt to cash in on the young adult market, and you know what the worst part is? It succeeded. I went to Goodreads and everyone loved it. It genuinely made me quite sad. And now it's being turned into the film franchise that never should have been. When the films turn out to be bad, don't blame the production crew or the team or anything, blame the source material. If you think this book is good, you're a girl, but more importantly, you are wrong. This is the Missing N turning off his camera.